Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, and we've got a class of 2025 that is finally complete. Ichiro Suzuki, CC Sabathia, and Billy Wagner will be joining Dick Allen and Dave Parker this summer in Cooperstown, Sunday, July 27th at the Clark Sports Complex out there on the grass. Big day for the Hall of Fame and for baseball fans around the globe. And I say around the globe because Ichiro Suzuki, of course, becomes the first player of Japanese descent, first Japanese-born player to be enshrined into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Very well deserved, of course. Very well deserved. And as you heard probably on Monday's show, talking with Manny Randawa, or the podcast, if you consume that on Tuesday when that came out, the question was 100% of votes from members of the BBWAA. Would every single person, I think the number was 394, 394 voters all check off the name Ichiro Suzuki? And of all the public ballots that were out there, the 50% of that number, close to 200, they were all checked yes. Unfortunately, no. Ichiro did not get 100%. He fell one vote shy, just like Derek Jeter did. And there's a very, very strong odds that we never find out who that person was, because the current system in place has it as such that if you are a BBWA voter, that's after you have been in the Baseball Writers Association of America for 10 seasons, then you get to vote on the Baseball Hall of Fame. And on your ballot, you can check currently, yes, I want my ballot to be made public. And 9 times out of 10, the author or the voter ends up writing about what their ballot looks like, and they make it public themselves. It generates a lot of really great traffic for websites, newspapers, because people want to know, hey, look, I'm from Seattle, or even I'm from Tampa, and I care about the Rays. I'm a baseball fan, and I read Mark Tompkin, the Tampa Bay Times. I want to know who he voted for. I'm really curious. Who did he think was a Hall of Famer from this year's ballot? I'm going to read that article. Some people might even pay for an article like that. However, you don't have to make that ballot public. So very, very strong odds that we probably won't ever find out who that person was. But still, 5 new members of the Hall of Fame this year brings the total to 351 Hall of Famers. The last player to debut in 2024 brought the total to 23,370 who have played in the majors, which means 1.5% of all big leaguers are in the Hall of Fame. Ichiro gets 99.7%. I don't know that we're ever going to see the perfect 100%. It was strange, even the fact that Mariano Rivera was that chosen player, so to speak, to get 100%. Jeter missed by 1. Griffey missed by 3. Tom Seaver missed by 5. Nolan Ryan by 6. So as time has gone by and as the system has changed, the voting process, these slam dunk, inner ring, inner circle Hall of Famers, elite of the elite, they get closer and closer to 100%, because I think we know now what a Hall of Famer looks like, or a no doubt Hall of Famer might look like. If you watch the announcement show over on MLB Network, you could also have just watched the show on MLB.com. They were streaming that live, which is a nice service that they were providing. Bob Costas was talking to Ichiro and had a question. He said, I got 2 questions. First one got out of the way. The second one, I thought, there's no way he asks about that interview close to 25 years ago now at this point. Bob Costas and Ichiro. I'm not sure if it was HBO Sports or if it was on the Bob Costas show. Might have been HBO Sports. And he asked Ichiro, you've learned some American, you've learned some English, and you learned some American phrases. What's your favorite? And he said, basically it's the heat in Kansas City in August is like two rats doing it in a garbage bag or a garbage can. And of course he cursed. He used that adult language. And I thought it was funny that Costas followed up with Ichiro on this question, because it made me think, does Bob Costas, is he thinking with his TikTok side of his brain, like, hey, this is going to be a good clip. It's already been viral. Let's make his response go viral. But Ichiro, he actually expressed a little bit of regret and almost remorse that he had used bad language. But he did at least salvage everything by revealing the name of the person who had told him that great American phrase, which I hadn't heard. Ichiro taught me something there. But it was reliever Ryan Franklin. So Ryan Franklin now immediately goated in a very special way for teaching Ichiro that famous line. Ken Griffey Jr. surprised Ichiro on the announcement show, and you could see Ichiro's expression just surprised. And Griffey said, you know what, Ichiro, you are going to bring the sake to Cooperstown this summer. That's what the rookies have to do. And for the first time in 20 years, you're a rookie again. And how great is that? You're nearly 50 years old. Some guys 40, some guys getting 60, 70 years old. They're rookies again, a part of that new fraternity that is the Hall of Fame. And then Ichiro, of course, signed off by saying, George, thank you very much, because Ken Griffey Jr.'s full name is George Kenneth Griffey Jr. The dudes over at Cespedes Family Barbecue on social media, they got a great podcast. They do some amazing work. I think they're with Yahoo Sports now. Jake Mintz, Jordan Schusterman, those guys are fantastic. They pointed out Ichiro has played more games with the Marlins than any of their other 5 Hall of Famers. Think about it. Pudge Rodriguez, Andre Dawson, both those guys were around for a season plus, over 100 games played with the Marlins. You got Tim Raines, Trevor Hoffman, and even Mike Piazza, those 5 games as he went from the Dodgers to the Mets. But even more interesting, perhaps, now that was the most interesting thing. I just happened to notice, hey, wait a minute. Let's add up all those games from the other 5 Hall of Famers. And sure enough, Ichiro has played more games with the Marlins than the other 5 Hall of Famers combined. That's just weird. That is just weird. Also on this ballot, you've got starting pitcher and CC Sabathia gets in on his first ballot, and closer Billy Wagner gets in on his 10th and final ballot. What's that? That's baseball right there. The starter in the first, the closer in his last. Sabathia just overjoyed. Billy Wagner overjoyed. It brought him to tears because he wasn't sure he was going to get in. And he hasn't played in the last 10 years, so it's not like he was getting that much better. A guy who is amongst the all-time greatest in terms of career saves, over 400 plus, has the most, the highest strikeout percentage of any player of all time. So the dude missed bats. He did it for a lot of championship clubs, a lot of teams that won their division, a lot of playoff teams. So he was a no-doubter in my book. He would have gotten my vote pretty much all 10 years. The only way a guy doesn't get a vote in year 1 is, well, you know what? You're going to get support, and I got 10 other guys that need that vote more than you do, because you're in your first year, and these other guys, they're in years 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like that can be the mathematics, unfortunately. That's why this system isn't as cut and dry as, hey, year 1, it's either yes or no, and then we're done with you. And maybe a veterans committee will dig into how successful your career is. Sure, that would make things a little more black and white, a little more cut and dry, but it would be a lot less fun. It would be a lot less fun. I'd also be remiss if I didn't remember. I kept referring to Ryan Thibodeau, not Mr. Tibbs, who does the Hall of Fame tracker by a different last name. I don't know where that came from, but Ryan Thibodeau is that guy that does an amazing job on the tracker. Carlos Beltran ended up falling short. He was trending just above the 75% mark with the public ballots that had been made available to Ryan Thibodeau. But once all of those private, quiet ones went in, they usually have a lot less names on those ballots. He goes down to 70.3%. And I believe every single player other than Curt Schilling who's received 70%, but not 75%, they've all gotten in eventually. Gil Hodges had to wait a very, very long time. Got to hope that Carlos Beltran doesn't have to wait quite as long. Andrew Jones, in his 8th year on the ballot, gets 66.2%. Chase Utley, in only his 2nd year on the ballot, 39.8%. That really is a surprise for a guy that I think is somewhat of a borderline Hall of Famer. Alex Rodriguez, 37.1%, followed by Manny Ramirez, 34.3%. Manny Ramirez, in his 9th year, next year is going to be his 10th and final. I don't know that any player has jumped up from 34% up to 75%. That's more than double of where he's at right now. So I think Manny Ramirez will end up fading away this time next year in 2026. Andy Pettitte in his 7th year on the ballot, 27.9%. Felix Rodriguez, a lot of support. Really surprised. 20.6%. Now again, I don't have a vote yet. I still got about 6 more years until I'm voting on the Baseball Hall of Fame. And when that time comes, I'm going to do my diligence on every single player, even if my initial gut reaction is no. Even if I say no, I'm going to do a little bit more work. But before that work, because I didn't put it in on Felix Hernandez, I don't know that I would have given him my vote. But I am glad that we have a system in place that as long as you get 5%, you come back next year and it forces those people that said no, or those people that couldn't find room on their 10-player ballot, to re-examine and say, yeah, you know what? I think he does deserve to get in. The numbers might not jump off the page as someone who compiled, but we just know that pitchers, particularly starting pitchers, simply do not compile at all anymore. So that being considered, you might have to go back and say, you know what? Felix Hernandez also playing in a smaller market in Seattle in relative anonymity. Okay, now you might need to do a little bit more digger deeping. What? Deeper digging. You got to do that. You got to do your homework for sure. Will, what's going on, man? Glad to see you jumping in the chat here on YouTube. Next year's class of Hall of Famers, or at least those that are going to be on the ballot for the first time, not very good. We talked about that a little bit with Manny Randhawa. The next couple years after that, a lot better. Buster Posey in 2027, Pujols in 2028, Miguel Cabrera 2029. So next year could be a good time to kind of clear things up. But maybe, just maybe, as you're pointing out, Will, here about next year's class, that means no one's going to be getting a vote. No one's going to be taking attention away from some of those PED guys. And so, other than Carlos Beltran getting in, could we get shut out altogether? I mean, maybe. You wouldn't think if Carlos Beltran is getting just over 70% that he would somehow get the same, if not less. But with nobody new and enticing on the ballot, everyone, maybe they just run back their votes and maybe they get a little more conservative. We've seen those kind of things happen. We've seen those traits before. Hopefully that is not the case. We also have Bobby Abreu in his 6th year, 19.5%. He's got a sneaky, interesting case. Was never a superstar, but was always very, very good. If he was playing now with the metrics that we typically use to evaluate players, we would have looked at Bobby Abreu in a completely different light. Jimmy Rollins in his 4th year, 18%. Omar Vizquel, his 8th year, 17.8%. Dustin Pedroia, 11.9%. Great start for a first time on the ballot. That is a great start. One of the things that typically gets discussed when discussing Hall of Famers is, can you tell the history of the game without this player? Can you tell the history of baseball without Dustin Pedroia? And the answer is kind of. Because Dustin Pedroia was not a world beater by any stretch of the imagination. He was a guy who did win an MVP, was only an All-Star 4 times, won 4 Gold Gloves, was a Rookie of the Year. Those are important accolades. Those are definitely worth something. Did win 1 Silver Slugger Award. but he was there in 2008. He wasn't part of the 2004 team, but he was there in 2008, and he was there again in 2013. So he does have 2 World Series wins. If Manny Ramirez isn't going to be in from that group, and John Lester is not going to be in from that group, which I think he ultimately will get in because he was a part of the 2016 Cubs, those guys get pushed ahead of the rest of the pack if they are a borderline Hall of Famer. And if no one else is going to represent the 2016 Chicago Cubs in the Hall of Fame, it seems strange. I think it makes sense. But you could see how John Lester might get in because he is the closest thing to a Hall of Famer that the 2016 club has. Because of that, you can maybe make the same case about 2008, 2013 for the Boston Red Sox. That could possibly be the case or the narrative that is made. Mark Burley, 11.4% in his 5th year. Francisco Rodriguez, just over 10%. David Wright, just over 8.1% in his 2nd year. Torrey Hunter, the last one to get 5%. He gets 5.1% in his 5th year. Rather surprised he's stuck around this long. But good guy, very well liked in the game. Could be somewhat of that factor. Guys that fall off in their first year: Ian Kinsler, Russell Martin, Brian McCann. Russell Martin actually got more votes, 2 more votes than Brian McCann. In my eyes, Brian McCann was a better catcher all around than Russell Martin. Curtis Granderson, 0.8%, 3 votes. Adam Jones, 3 votes. Hanley Ramirez, Fernando Rodney, and Ben Zobrist all got 0 votes. There's 2 other names, though, that are missing on that list, or rather are missing off my reading of that list. I'll get to them in just a second. Some other observations from today's announcements. I'm pretty sure Baseball Reference crashed because people were trying to pull up players' numbers. I had a couple issues going in on things that I wanted to check out. Didn't work. I noticed, Ichiro and CC Sabathia both debuted in the majors in 2001. So they are probably the first players to get into the Hall of Fame from the 2000s, right? Not true. Joe Mauer, last year. Joe Mauer was actually drafted in 2001 out of high school, debuted in 2004. But the 2 players I left off the list, Carlos González and Troy Tulowitzki. How did Troy Tulowitzki and Carlos González fare in the Hall of Fame voting? Well, we were at 0 this entire time with all of the public ballots. And the results are in: 4 votes for Tulowitzki, 1%, and 0.5% for Cargo, 2%. So neither man gets shut out, as it would have been a surprise if they would have gotten 0 votes. We saw last year Matt Holliday got 4 votes. Tulo also ends up getting 4. It's an honor to just be on the ballot. But it feels a little bit better to know that these 2 greats in Rockies history did not get completely shut out. So they will not be back on the ballot. And it remains Todd Helton, Larry Walker, and Dale Murphy, the only 3 Rockies to ever stay on the ballot more than 1 year. Big Cat Andres Galarraga came very close. He got 22 votes, 4.1%. He fell a little bit shy in 2010. So Galarraga, 4th most votes of any Rockies player. He received 22 votes. The top 3 guys, as I said, Larry Walker, Todd Helton, Dale Murphy, 1, 2, and 3. Galarraga, 4th with 22 votes. 5th most votes for a former Rocky on a Hall of Fame ballot, believe it or not, Sandy Alomar Jr. with 16. He spent about 2 months in purple, but he's a Rocky. If Mike Piazza is a Marlins Hall of Famer with his 5 games played, then okay, Sandy Alomar Jr. has to be a part of that. 6th most votes on a Hall of Fame ballot by a former Rocky, Jamie Moyer got 10 votes. Tied for 7th with 7 votes, Brett Saberhagen and Darryl Kyle. Tied for 9th with 6 votes, Jason Giambi and Vinny Castilla. Right after that, it is Holiday and a couple other players with 4 votes. So good to know that Cargo and Tulo were not completely shut out. That's certainly a positive. And again, it's a positive for the game of baseball. As our friend over here, Up in Smoke on YouTube, Ichiro, your favorite player of all time. I mean, I think he's a lot of people's favorite player of all time, not just folks in Seattle. I mean, he was very charismatic, very stylish too, off the field as well. You got to play in New York a little bit with the Yankees. Glad to see you saw him once at Yankee Stadium. Probably would have been the new Yankee Stadium. Fans in Colorado know him well from his 3,000th hit, doing that at Coors Field. So a really good class of 2025 going into the hall, or rather, going into the hall this summer, having their induction this summer, July 27th in Cooperstown. What about the 2026 ballot? Well, there was already a graphic by MLB.com, and the two names that I thought would be on it are on it. Doesn't guarantee they're going to be on that ballot, but more likely than not, they probably will. Matt Kemp and Daniel Murphy. Yeah, both Matt Kemp and Daniel Murphy were on the 2020 team. Matt Kemp's the one I think a lot more people probably do forget. And with Daniel Murphy, some of you out there, the hardcores out there are saying, Patrick, wait a minute. Daniel Murphy was still playing professional ball last year. First in an independent league, and then in the minors for the Los Angeles Angels. However, how it works is your clock does not reset to 5 years after your final year in the majors unless you play in the majors, unless you play in the big leagues. So the fact that Daniel Murphy was playing in the minors last year at the Angels does not change the fact that 2020 was his last year in the majors. So you wait 5 years and then you get on the ballot. So 2020 plus 5 is 2025. In November of this year, he will be on that ballot to possibly get in as part of the class of 2026. And no, he's certainly not. 2027 on the ballot, 4 interesting names. I think maybe 3 can get on. Probably 2, definitely 1. Wade Davis, Dexter Fowler, Jonathan Lucroy, John Axford. 2028, Greg Holland might get his way onto the Hall of Fame ballot in a couple years from now. Chasen Shreve, you remember him? He tossed 1 inning, 1 scoreless inning with the Rockies this past year. He signs a minor league deal with Atlanta that can end up being worth $1.3 million if he makes the big league roster. Atlanta is doing their best impression of the Rockies, I think, in a lot of ways. They've already got former Rocky and Denver-based or Denver-born reliever Pierce Johnson. They just selected Anderson Pilar from Miami in the Rule 5 draft. PR was an international signing by the Rockies in 2016. He pitched in the minors with Colorado through 2023, signed with the Marlins last off season, and had a lot more success in the minors with them. So we'll see if Atlanta ends up keeping Pilar around for the duration of the 2025 campaign. You know that Walt Weiss has been a bench coach there with Brian Snitker for a while. A couple other former Rockies been on that staff too. Just to wrap things up around Major League Baseball, some other news and notes worth reporting on. Dodgers reportedly have reached a tentative agreement with reliever Kirby Yates. So, yeah, 2 of the better closers on the market. Looks like they're both going to be headed to the Dodgers. That one is not finalized just yet. Jurickson Profar's market has started to heat up after Anthony Santander came off with his 5-year deal with the Blue Jays. Profar is now out there as probably one of the next best options as far as outfielders are concerned. He's looking for a 3-year deal, and he's deserving of that. Got only 1 year last year because 2023 was rough for him with Colorado. Got the 1-year deal with Colorado. But if you throw out that 2023 season, you've got 4 seasons from 2020 to 2024 that were worth 7.8 wins above replacement. So he's been a 2-win player basically for 4 of the last 5 years. I don't know if he's going to get 3 years. He's probably going to have to settle for 2. And he might even end up joining Toronto as well. He might end up joining Anthony Santander as the Blue Jays are interested. Martin Perez signs a 1-year deal with the White Sox worth a guaranteed $5 million. Up in Smoke, Will, Thank you guys for jumping into the chat over here on YouTube. Appreciate it. Got a lot more shows, a lot more Hall of Fame conversations coming up later on in the week. Haven't decided if it'll be Thursday or Friday. Getting in depth on Rockies Fest. It's coming up on Saturday. What do you need to know? How do you get tickets if you don't already have them? Who's going to be there? What's going to be there? What are the events? There's a lot going down, and it's fun. I know there's a lot of fans out there right now. Good chance if you're listening to this, you're a frustrated Rockies fan. Sure. But you love baseball, and you love the players individually, and you love Coors Field. And unless you are boycotting the team, you might as well go and enjoy yourself and maybe even say hi to me if you see me around. So that'll be coming up later on in the week at Patrick D. Lyons MLB on all those social media platforms. Appreciate you joining me today, giving me some momentum. You can give me more momentum by subscribing to the channel on YouTube, leaving a review over on the podcast side, wherever you might listen to it. But look, bottom line is, at the end of the day, my podcast and my momentum, it's only as good as my next show. So, of course, I'll talk to you then.